My daughter slapped me. My son clapped. My daughter-in-law smirked like it was all rehearsed. That moment, I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just walked out of the banquet they said was in my honor. For 3 years, I stayed quiet, hoping they would remember who I once was to them. But when they brought a contract and tried to erase me with a signature, I remembered something else. A voice, a promise, a document they forgot I had. That night, I unlocked the box my husband left me, and I finally wrote the ending they never saw coming. The envelope was thick, too thick for a birthday card. My name was written in silver script across the front. No mom, no mother, just Margot. I sat at the edge of the kitchen table, morning light catching on my teacup. The house was still, the kind of stillness that only lives inside an old woman's home after the people she raised have left it behind. Inside was a glossy invitation full of floral flourishes and embossed lettering. An evening to honor our matriarch, a celebration of legacy and love. It was signed by Lana, not handwritten, just printed. I held the card in my hand a little longer than I should have. I stared at the words until they blurred. I had not heard Lana's voice in over 3 years. Not since the week after my husband's funeral, when she moved my things into the guest room without asking. Just like that. No discussion, no consideration. My own bedroom, where I would slept beside Samuel for 43 years, suddenly became too much space for one person. Her words, not mine. So now, a party, in my name. I ran my fingers along the edge of the invitation. It was beautiful. Deliberately so, the kind of design that costs money. I imagined Lana at a print shop, choosing fonts and paperweight. She always had an eye for aesthetics and a knack for timing. It was dated for next Saturday at Reed's new home, the one with the open-concept kitchen and the backyard built for catered events. My chest tightened as I set the card down. What do you do when your own children go silent for years and then suddenly reappear in calligraphy? They had not visited, had not asked if I needed anything. When my knee surgery came and went, I called an Uber to the hospital. The driver, a young man named Marcus, waited for me after the procedure. He helped me to the door, asked if I had family to check on me. I lied and said yes. When the roof leaked last winter, I paid for it with my pension check. The contractor, an older gentleman with kind eyes, kept asking where my children were. I made excuses. Now they wanted to honor me. I stood and walked to the drawer beneath the toaster. It still smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. Tucked at the very back was a small Polaroid from 20 years ago. I was standing in our old garden, my hands covered in soil, my husband leaning over, brushing dirt from my cheek. He used to say I was the root holding the family tree upright. That picture reminded me. I wasn't always invisible. I could have thrown it away. I could have stayed home and let them carry on their show without me. But something about that perfect invitation felt wrong. Too smooth, too staged. So I picked up the phone and called Dolores. She still worked part-time at the florist where Lana used to place her corporate orders. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Dolores said something that made my stomach drop. They booked the venue 3 months ago, but your name wasn't part of the plan. Not until last week. I hung up slowly, so it wasn't about honoring me. It never was. But I would still go. Not to be honored, but to see exactly what they were trying to bury me under. And maybe, just maybe, to remind them. I am still Margot, and I am not done yet. I arrived at Reed's house 5 minutes early. The driveway was already full. Cars I didn't recognize, expensive ones with vanity plates and fresh wax jobs. A valet waved me toward the curb like I was one of the neighbors who wandered in by accident. The house glowed with golden string lights draped across the hedges. Tables were set up in the backyard, each one decorated with soft linen, crystal glassware, and centerpieces of cream-colored roses. My name was nowhere, no sign, no place of honor. One of the younger servers, a boy who looked no older than 16, pointed toward a small table near the sliding door to the kitchen. It was tucked halfway behind a tall potted ficus. The chair wobbled when I sat. There was no name card, no water. From this angle, I could hear the staff moving in and out of the kitchen, clinking trays, whispering. I pulled my shawl tighter. The air was warm, but something about that corner felt cold. Camille was the first one I saw. She floated through the yard with a glass of white wine, laughing at something, Lana whispered. Her dress shimmered, gold sequins catching the light with every step. When her eyes finally landed on me, she didn't smile. She just nodded, barely. Then looked away, as if my presence was inconvenient, like she had tolerated it, not welcomed it. I watched the guests mingle, faces I didn't recognize, people who didn't know me, didn't know what I had built, what I had sacrificed. They laughed and clinked glasses while I sat hidden behind a plant like an embarrassing relative. They hoped no one would notice, but I noticed them. I noticed everything. Lana stood near the front, holding a small stack of note cards. Her makeup was impeccable, her posture sharp. She had always been the performer in the family, the one who could make anyone believe anything. She tapped a spoon gently on a champagne flute and began to speak. We gather tonight to mark the next chapter, not just of our family's legacy, but of how we define purpose, community, and stewardship. She never looked at me. Not once. Behind her, Reed adjusted his tie and stepped forward. My son, the boy I had raised, fed, clothed, loved unconditionally, who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, who cried when I dropped him off at college, who once told me I was the strongest person he knew. Tonight isn't only about gratitude, he said, his voice carrying across the yard with practiced authority. It is about vision, about structure, about the future of what our family has built. I felt it then. Not grief, not anger. Something stranger, like being the guest at your own retirement party, except no one told you you had been let go. Camille drifted behind the speakers. Close enough to be seen, not close enough to be involved. She sipped her wine slowly, eyes darting between faces. Calculating, always calculating. Then Reed smiled and gestured toward a small table near the front. It held a large folder, bound in leather, with gold lettering on the front. A notary stood nearby, holding a clipboard. He was young, professional, the kind of man who charged by the hour and asked no questions. No one said my name, but I knew that folder had something to do with me, and they were parading it like a prize. Someone clapped. Lana took a bow, as if she were the host of a successful fundraising gala. Camille raised her glass toward Reed. The guests murmured approval, though I doubted any of them understood what they were approving. I stood up. No one noticed. I walked to the edge of the gathering, near enough to hear their final words. Lana glanced at the notary, then said, "We are ready to formalize the transition." The timing couldn't be better. Her voice carried that practiced smoothness she used in business meetings, the tone that made people trust her even when they shouldn't. Camille turned just slightly. Her lips curled at the corner. Not quite a smile. Something smaller, quieter, calculated. Then Reed said, "All we need is one more signature." The words hung in the air like a verdict already decided. The notary turned toward me. I didn't move. Lana's heels clicked against the patio stones as she walked toward me, each step deliberate and measured. She leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same expensive scent she had worn to Samuel's funeral. Her voice was gentle, too gentle. "This is a formality, just so we can move ahead." And then, as I stood still, she lifted her hand and slapped me. It wasn't hard, it wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Camille let out a breath, barely audible, but somehow satisfied. Reed clapped once, slowly, like it was punctuation at the end of a sentence he had been waiting years to write. No one said a word. The guests pretended not to see, suddenly fascinated by their wine glasses and the arrangement of flowers. And I did not cry, because this wasn't a surprise. It was a reveal, and I had been ready for it. The notary stepped forward, clearing his throat with professional discomfort. He was young, maybe Reed's age, with the kind of nervous energy that came from being paid well to not ask questions. "Mrs. Alden," he said, keeping his eyes low like he couldn't quite meet my gaze. "The documents are ready for signature. Initial here and here." He didn't look at me like I was his elder. He looked at me like I was the last box on a checklist, an inconvenient formality standing between him and his fee. I glanced down at the folder. Gold letters read, "Family Estate Reallocation." I opened it slowly, my fingers steady despite the tremor in my chest. Pages and pages, typed indexed. Sections highlighted in yellow marker. Witness signatures already in place, neat and official. A final line waiting, blank and expectant. My name was printed in bold letters beneath it. In that moment, I realized this hadn't been a spontaneous decision. This had been drafted, reviewed, notarized, all before they ever sent the invitation. The signatures were dated weeks ago. They had decided to erase me before they even looked me in the eye. The party wasn't about honoring me. It was about having witnesses to my signing away everything I had built. Reed's voice cut through my thoughts, smooth but firm with an undertone of impatience. "This just clarifies the trust structure. Mother, it keeps things clean. It is not personal." The word mother sounded foreign in his mouth, like he was reading from a script. I looked up at him, my son, my firstborn, the boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street. He couldn't hold my gaze for more than a second before looking away, jaw tight with what I recognized as guilt, trying to masquerade as righteousness. Lana crossed her arms, her patience visibly thin. "If you want to cause a scene, do it quickly. We have investors here. Investors at my honor party." The word tasted bitter even thinking it. Camille didn't speak. She didn't need to. She leaned slightly on one hip, arms folded, her fingers running along the edge of a bracelet I had never seen before. White gold with diamonds that caught the string lights. Probably cost more than my monthly pension. Probably paid for with money from the same family fund they were now pushing me out of. I looked back at the page, my thumb resting over the signature line. The pen felt heavy in my hand, weighted with 43 years of marriage, of building a life, of raising children who now stood before me like strangers in expensive clothes. But I didn't lift the pen. Instead, I slid the folder closed with a soft whisper of paper against paper. "I will not be signing anything tonight," I said. My voice was calm, steadier than I felt. There was a pause, not gasps, not shouting, just silence. The kind that settles when people are deciding whether to press harder or back away. Someone's wine glass clinked against a table. A server dropped a spoon in the kitchen. Normal sounds that felt amplified in the sudden tension. Lana scoffed, a sound I had heard 1,000 times over the years, usually when she didn't get her way. "You are being dramatic. This is for your own good, for everyone's good." That is when she reached out again, her hand moving toward my arm like she was going to guide me back to the table, back to compliance. I stepped back, and then, from the corner of the garden, Reed clapped once, a single slow clap that echoed too loud for such a small gesture. It was deliberate, mocking. "Final," Camille smirked, that tiny curl of the lip I had seen earlier. Now deeper satisfied, like she had been waiting for this moment, planning for it, and everything was going exactly according to her design. What stayed with me wasn't the slap. It wasn't even the clap. It was the look in Camille's eyes. She knew this would happen. She had expected it, maybe even orchestrated it, and she didn't care if I saw it. In fact, she wanted me to see it. This was her victory lap. I stepped away from the table. The notary looked relieved, quickly packing his clipboard like he couldn't wait to escape the scene. Reed didn't stop me. Neither did Lana. They watched me go with the detached interest of people watching a problem solve itself. Camille raised her glass and whispered something to someone behind her, probably about how they had tried to include me, how I had been unreasonable, how they had done everything they could. I didn't wait to hear. As I walked past the guests, none of them met my eyes. Their laughter resumed almost immediately, like I had simply fulfilled a brief role and was now dismissed. Disposable, a minor inconvenience at an otherwise lovely party. I made it to the driveway without a word. My car was still parked at the curb where the valet had dismissed me hours earlier. He didn't offer to open the door. Inside the car, I sat with my hands on the wheel. Engine off, windows down. My pulse was steady. I stared ahead at the string lights, at the house where my son lived, at the life they had built without me. I had built this family's first savings account from scratch, working 2 jobs while Samuel finished his degree. I had packed Reed's lunch every day until he left for college, wrote encouraging notes on napkins that he claimed embarrassed him but never threw away. I would paid for Lana's first apartment after her divorce, helped her with the deposit when her credit was shot, and her pride was wounded. I had been there for scraped knees and broken hearts, for graduations and weddings, for every milestone that mattered. And still, they had tried to write me out, like I was a footnote in their story instead of the one who had written the first chapters. But I wasn't the kind of woman who left empty-handed. At home, I unlocked the hall closet, pulled out the step stool, and reached behind the top shelf, past the winter coats that still smelled like Samuel's cologne. There, wrapped in a linen bag that had belonged to my mother, was the box, small, heavy mahogany, with brass corners. The lock still clicked tight after all these years, the key worn smooth from Samuel's fingers. I carried it to the kitchen, placed it on the table where we had shared 10,000 meals, 10,000 conversations. My hand hovered over it. I already knew what was inside, the original will, and something even more important. A USB drive, and my husband's voice, waiting for me like he had promised it would be. When I stepped out of that banquet hall, the air felt heavier than it should have. The night was warm, but I shivered. No one followed me. No one called after me. I wasn't surprised. I drove home without music, my hands gripping the steering wheel, as if that was the only solid thing left. At a red light, I glanced at myself in the rearview mirror. My cheek still carried the red mark from Lana's hand. But that wasn't what stung. It was the applause. It was Reed's casual little clap and Camille's smug silence. I pulled into the driveway, headlights slicing across the garage where Samuel used to tinker with old radios on Sunday afternoons. The house felt colder than usual. As I walked in, my heels echoed against the hardwood floor that we had refinished together, the summer before he got sick. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down at the kitchen table, and stared into nothing. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, the same rhythm that had marked our days together for decades. Then, I reached for the small wooden box I hadn't opened in 3 years. I undid the chain slowly, fingers trembling not from fear, but from something deeper, restraint, maybe, or memory. The key felt warm in my palm, like it had been waiting for this moment as long as I had. I opened the box. There it was, the envelope with the original copy of Samuel's will, untouched by lawyers who charged by the hour to rewrite history. I pulled it out gently and laid it flat on the table. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, but the ink was clear. Every line was familiar. Every word was a reminder of the man who saw me, truly saw me. Then I reached deeper into the box and retrieved the USB drive, the one Samuel had handed me just days before he passed. I remember the way he had pressed it into my palm, his hand still steady despite the weakness in his voice. He had whispered, not from fear, but intention. "If they ever try to erase you, let them hear this." I walked over to the old laptop in the den, one we never upgraded because Samuel said it was reliable. "Good things last," he used to say. "No need to fix what isn't broken." I plugged the USB in. A single audio file appeared on the screen. I clicked it open, and his voice came through the speakers, steady, calm, deliberate. "My name is Samuel Everett. This message is for whoever needs to understand what I wanted. My wife, Margot, built everything with me. Every cent, every idea, every sacrifice. She worked 2 jobs while I finished school. She took care of the children when I traveled for work. She made the hard decisions when I was too proud to make them myself. I made sure the will reflects that. If anyone changes it, they are not just dishonoring me. They are denying the truth. Don't let them write over the story we lived. I sat frozen. The voice I hadn't heard in years filled the room. But it didn't break me. It braced me. It reminded me of who I was before they tried to make me disappear. I closed the laptop slowly. My hands weren't trembling anymore. I walked back to the kitchen, poured the water down the sink, and stood there in silence. I wasn't going to fight with them. I wasn't going to scream or plead or beg for recognition. I was going to hold my ground. I was going to use what Samuel had given me. I opened the drawer again and pulled out a small notepad. I wrote down 3 names and phone numbers. People who knew the truth, people who would help me tell it. Then I closed the box and relocked it. But this time, I didn't hide it away. I left it on the kitchen table where I could see it, where it could remind me that some things are worth protecting. Before bed, I placed the will and the USB in a new folder and slid it under the floorboard in the back guest room. Just in case, some battles require backup plans. That night, I slept. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. Not because the pain was gone, but because I finally remembered who I was. And I knew Samuel never forgot. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The house was quiet, just as I needed it to be. I made a cup of black tea and sat by the window, letting the early light warm my face. My mind was calm, but my purpose was clear. By 8 of the clock, I was dialing Harold's number. Harold Peterson had been Samuel's business partner before he became a lawyer. He would stood as best man at our wedding, held Reed when he was born. Been there for every major moment in our lives, until the children decided he was too old-fashioned for their modern problems. It had been years since I last heard his voice. But when he answered, it was as if time folded in on itself. "Margot," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I have been waiting for this call." I told him everything. The party, the contract, the slap, the recording. He didn't interrupt. He let me pour out 3 years of silence in one long confession. When I finished, he asked for the documents. I promised to scan them that afternoon and drive to his office the next day. Before hanging up, his voice lowered into something softer, more personal. "Samuel always knew this might happen. He made sure you would have what you need when the time came." I sat for a moment, letting that sink in. My husband had protected me even after death, had seen what I was too trusting to see while he was alive. Later that morning, I made my second call. Dolores answered on the 3rd ring, her voice carrying that familiar, tired warmth. She was once a close friend, before Camille came along and turned every family gathering into a silent contest of status and usefulness. Dolores had worked at the foundation my husband and I built, the one that provided scholarships for women returning to school after raising families. She was the heart of it, quiet, compassionate, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays and showed up with soup when your world fell apart. Until one day she was gone. No notice, no goodbye, just an empty desk and a replacement who wore designer suits and spoke in corporate buzzwords. I asked her if she remembered why she left. She chuckled. Not bitter, just worn. "Because your daughter, in-law said, I didn't bring enough value to the team. That I was dead weight." She said it. "While wearing a jacket I knew you gave her for Christmas." Dolores didn't ask why I was calling either. She simply asked when I would like to meet. We decided on the same afternoon. She offered to bring pastries, and for a moment I smiled. Some people never change, and sometimes that is exactly what you need. The third and final call was harder, not because I didn't trust the person on the other end, but because she was the last thread connecting me to the days before everything started unraveling. Her name was Evelyn, an old administrative aide at the local credit union. She had worked with Samuel closely, especially during the early years of our family trust. When she answered, she sounded surprised, but happy. "Margot, how lovely to hear from you. How are you holding up?" I told her I needed help checking the activity on a few family accounts. I reminded her I wasn't asking for anything illegal, only that I wanted to know if my children had used my name, or Samuel's name, for transfers we never approved. She paused, and I could almost hear her mind turning. "Margot, if something is going on, you deserve to know. Let me do some digging. I will call you in a few days." I thanked her and hung up. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't care. The past 3 years had taught me that silence often protects the wrong people. I had stayed quiet too long, hoping they would remember what family meant. Now, every conversation felt like reclaiming a part of myself. That afternoon Dolores came by. She brought warm lemon scones and a printout of the board roster from 5 years ago when she was forced out. I made tea again, this time for both of us. We sat in the living room and talked about Samuel, about the old days, about the quiet, unnoticed women who always did the work, but never signed their names on the front page. She told me about the wellness retreat Lana had organized the previous spring, the one listed as community outreach, $37,000 to a luxury spa in Colorado, she said, pulling out a folder. "I have the receipts. It wasn't community outreach. It was a vacation for her and her friends. When she left, she hugged me longer than necessary. You still have fight in you, Margot. That is more than most people ever get back." By the end of the day, I had 3 allies. One knew the law, one knew the players, one knew where the paper trail began, and I knew I wasn't going to be erased without leaving a mark. I spent the following morning at the kitchen table, every document spread out before me, like a broken puzzle. My fingers traced the lines of the will, the signatures, the transfer records. I moved slowly, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I began with the trust account. Dolores had flagged a few dates that helped narrow it down. I pulled the quarterly statements and focused on wire transfers marked as consulting fees. One, in particular, stood out. A payment of $16,000 made to a consulting agency registered just a few weeks before the payment. The agency name, CMC Advisory. I didn't need a lawyer to recognize Camille's initials. I printed the statement and circled it in red. Then I moved to the family foundation expenses. Checked with the foundation's ledger, listed under community outreach, except this retreat wasn't public. It was invite-only, filled with Lana's friends and a few social media influencers. Dolores confirmed it with a forwarded photo album she found online. Lana smiling in a white robe, clinking champagne glasses. A banner in the background that read "Rooted in Renewal." I pinned the spa expense beneath the consulting transfer. The pattern was becoming clear. Small amounts, disguised as legitimate expenses, but all flowing to my children's personal projects. The next folder was Samuel's archive. His handwriting still haunted me. Tidy, intentional. Every letter formed with the precision of a man who believed words mattered. I found a letter tucked inside, an old file marked legacy, handwritten notes about board members, donation lists, estate strategy. One line caught my eye, record of conflict. Camille raised concern over Dolores's value to the team. Urged termination. No performance issue noted. There it was, a paper trail of the beginning, the first crack in the foundation they would eventually try to demolish completely. By noon, I had assembled everything into neat folders. I labeled them systematically: trust, unauthorized payments, foundation, fund misuse, conflict notes, staff removal. I scanned them all into a secure drive Harold had set up for me. He told me to hold on to the physical copies and store them off. That afternoon, Evelyn from the credit union called back. Her voice was careful, measured. She confirmed that Camille had recently attempted to update trustee contact information. replacing my name with Reed's on 2 accounts. She said the request had been submitted electronically, with a scanned letter supposedly signed by me. She paused. "Margot, the signature doesn't match your other forms." I flagged it for now. "But you should know, Reed's already acting like it has been approved." I thanked her, my chest tight not from fear, but from anger, or maybe finally clarity. They were building a story without me in it. They thought I was too slow to keep up, too sentimental to fight back. But I wasn't fighting for revenge. I was fighting to put the truth back where it belonged. By the time the sun dipped past the trees, I had 3 folders, 2 backups, 1 locked briefcase, and a timeline. A week from now, Harold would start sending letters. But first, I had one more step. I needed a witness, so I called Sharon, a notary who had known Samuel since his early days in city council. I asked her to come by. She didn't ask why. She just said she would bring her stamp and be there before dinner. That evening, as she signed the affidavit confirming the contents and authenticity of my documents, I felt something settle inside me. Not peace, exactly, but steadiness. I wasn't done, but I was no longer uncertain. The morning sun hadn't fully climbed the sky when Harold arrived. He looked older than I remembered, his silver hair thinner, his cane tapping softly on the tile floor as he stepped into my kitchen, like he had 100 times back when my husband was alive. We didn't exchange pleasantries. He simply nodded, opened his briefcase, and began laying out the plan we had quietly agreed on over the phone. 3 letters, that is what he called them. Not legal notices, not demands. Just 3 letters, but the weight they carried could knock down stone walls built on lies. The first letter was addressed to Reed. It outlined the potential criminal liability of presenting a forged financial document. To a legal institution, Harold had traced the funds Camille funneled through the family trust under the guise of consulting fees. There were receipts, there were dates. Camille's name was on them. Reed's digital signature sat beside it. The second letter went to Lana. It was more surgical. Harold had identified several instances where the family account was used to pay vendors affiliated with her spa events. One name caught my eye, Violet Lux Retreats, a spa in Napa Valley. I remembered the brochure on her coffee table last spring. Glossy photos of women in white robes meditating by infinity pools. Harold attached a timeline of withdrawals matched with event dates, proving systematic misuse of family funds. The third letter, though, was the most powerful. It included the original will, still notarized, still legally binding, and a scanned copy of the USB voice file from my husband. Harold stamped it and attached a sworn affidavit. This one didn't go to my children. It was sent to our family bank and to the regional office of the Estate Management Authority. This letter was not a warning. It was a preemptive strike. I didn't deliver the letters myself. That would have made it personal, emotional, easy to dismiss as the ravings of a bitter old woman. Harold made a call to someone at the bank. A woman named Maren, who once worked under my husband. She remembered him, still spoke of him with reverence. She agreed to place the sealed letters in the correct hands, without delay, without drama. That afternoon, I sat in my garden while Harold drafted the final supporting documents. The air smelled of rosemary and fresh soil. The stillness was heavy, but not suffocating. For the first time in a long while, I felt as if I wasn't the one scrambling to catch up. I looked over at the small silver box on the patio table, the same one I had unlocked just days ago. Inside were scanned copies, photos, timelines, bank statements. The truth was no longer hidden. It was printed, stapled, notarized and sealed. Harold paused before leaving. He looked at me, not as a lawyer, but as someone who had watched my family try to erase me. "You are doing this with dignity, Margot," he said. "They will not see it coming because they never thought you would stand." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. He already knew. As the sun dipped lower, I lit a single candle on the kitchen counter. It wasn't for drama, it was habit. My husband used to say it gave the room a kind of peace, especially before something important. Tomorrow the letters would land. Camille's facade would crack. Reed's entitlement would falter. Lana's carefully curated image would show its seams. The first call came from Reed at 7:43 a.m. His voice was clipped, almost too calm to be natural. He spoke in circles, asking if I had seen something or heard from Harold. I stayed quiet, letting him fill the silence with increasingly desperate explanations. Then he said it. Camille had told him about a letter. Not just one, 3, and now the bank had frozen access to their joint account. He tried to sound angry at me, but I could hear it underneath the bluster. He wasn't furious, he was afraid. Before I could say a word, he shifted tactics. Said Camille had always run the finances, that he never looked too closely at what she did. He said her judgment had changed lately, that maybe she had made mistakes. Then, barely a breath later, he mumbled that maybe it was Lana's idea, that the women in the family had always been better with money. He was already building his defense, throwing everyone else under the bus to save himself. I didn't respond, I just listened. For the first time in years, I wasn't reaching for anyone's approval, wasn't trying to smooth over their problems or make excuses for their behavior. When I hung up, the second call came within minutes. Camille. Her tone was laced with ice from the first word. She asked if I was really doing this, then accused me of dragging the family name through the mud. She called Harold a relic, accused me of staging a coup over money that wasn't even mine. I didn't speak. That silence must have unnerved her because she tried again. Softer this time. Said she could make things right, that she just needed me to reconsider, to think about what this would do to the family's reputation. She asked what I wanted, as if this was all some negotiation she could win with the right offer. Still, I said nothing. And then she snapped. If you go forward with this, I will make sure everyone remembers your past. I will drag your parents' names into it. Their debts, their shame. I know people who remember what you came from. I took a breath. My hands were steady. I remember them too, I said. And I hung up. It wasn't a power play, it was clarity. She could threaten to expose my humble beginnings. But I wasn't ashamed of where I came from. I was proud of how far I had traveled. The third call wasn't a call at all. It was a voicemail from Lana. Left at 2:17 p.m., while I was meeting with Harold to review the bank's response. She didn't even try to deny anything. Instead, she begged. Her voice cracked as she explained that her investors had pulled out, that a planned expansion deal for her spa chain had collapsed because the banks flagged inheritance issues tied to her startup funding. She cried actual tears that I could hear through the phone. Then she said something that stayed with me longer than all the threats. I never wanted to cut you out, Mom. I just thought it would be easier if the story ended your way. Clean, simple, without all the complications. There it was. The rewriting of a life wrapped up in polished language. Easier if the story ended your way, not a lie, not quite, but not the truth either. She wanted me gone. But she wanted it to be my choice, so she could feel better about it. That evening, I lit another candle, not to comfort myself, but to remember. Years ago, my husband had said, "Never let the silence make you feel erased. Use it." I sat down at the kitchen table and reread the will again. His signature, his notes in the margins, his line in the final paragraph, to my wife Margot, who held this family quietly together. Even when we forgot she was the glue. Forgot, not ignored, not dismissed. Forgot. There is a difference. They had forgotten. I had remembered. I didn't call anyone else that night. I didn't have to. The silence did the work now. Reed would turn against Camille. Camille would claw at Lana. Lana would play the victim, but the web had already unraveled. Not because I tore them down, but because I never bought into their version of the truth to begin with. There are moments when a person reclaims something quietly without shouting. That night, I reclaimed my name. And the next morning, I would show them that remembering is stronger than rewriting. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. in a small conference room at Harold's office. No fancy venues. No photographers. No family banners. Just one long wooden table, worn at the edges, and 4 chairs waiting for 3 grown children, and a mother who used to stay silent. I arrived first, wearing the same blue coat I wore to their father's funeral. Not for drama, for memory. It was the coat Samuel had bought me for our 35th anniversary, the one he said brought out my eyes. Lana came next. She didn't greet me. She looked pale, smaller than usual, like her voice had been stolen by fear. Her designer handbag sat clutched in her lap like a shield. Reed followed, still wearing a suit too crisp for the occasion, with tension in his jaw that didn't belong to a man in control. He avoided looking at me directly, focusing instead on the folders Harold had arranged on the table. Camille was last, high heels, flawless makeup, but her eyes darted nervously around the room. She wasn't used to rooms. She couldn't dominate with charm or intimidation. Harold walked in, placed 3 identical folders on the table, and nodded at me. I stood. "This isn't a negotiation," I said, my voice carrying across the room with quiet authority. "This is a correction." No one moved. "Your father's will remains unchanged," I continued. "You are all aware now that it was never revised, never reassigned. It stands, as does the evidence that some of you attempted to rewrite it without legal ground." Camille shifted in her seat. Lana lowered her head. Reed's hands clenched on the table. I paused, and then said what I had held inside too long. "But I am not keeping it." That got their attention. I watched their eyes, the calculations behind them, shifting like slot machine wheels, looking for a winning combination. "I am placing it all in a foundation. A trust. Not one built on control or guilt, a scholarship fund, a resource network. For women who, like me, were erased inside their own homes." I opened a small leather folder and slid the first page across the table. "The name of the fund is, For Those They Forgot. Your father once told me I was the glue that held everything together. And then you forgot me. But forgetting does not erase. It only delays what must return." Reed exhaled sharply. Camille clenched her jaw. Lana whispered, almost to herself, "Why would you do this?" I didn't answer right away. I let the question hang in the air while I gathered my thoughts. "Because," I finally said, "legacy isn't what you inherit. It is what you leave behind for others to build on." Harold handed them each a copy of the fund's legal structure. Everything transparent, nothing hidden. The foundation would be launched within the month. The assets that once held our family together would now help others rebuild their lives after being cast aside. Camille tried to speak, something about legacy, about bloodlines, about how family money should stay in the family. I held up my hand. "Legacy is what you leave in truth, not what you snatch in secret." I gathered my coat. The room was still. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, deserved. I looked at each of them once more. Lana, who had learned to use tears as weapons. Reed, who had forgotten that strength comes from character. Not control. Camille, who had mistaken manipulation for intelligence. And then I walked out. That morning, I didn't just reclaim legal ground. I reclaimed meaning. I rewrote the definition of motherhood, not as the woman who gives endlessly, but as the one who protects what matters, even from her own children. 3 days after the announcement, I received a phone call from the senior account manager at Morgan Financial. Her voice was steady, respectful, but there was a firm edge underneath every word. She informed me that Reed's access to the family fund had been temporarily suspended, pending a formal investigation into irregular authorizations made under his name. The flagged activity included a series of wire transfers marked as legal retainer fees and early inheritance disbursements, none of which had prior approval. When I asked who had reported the inconsistencies, she paused. "Your friend Walter brought them to our attention." Walter, my husband's closest friend, former business partner, and now a media consultant for a local news syndicate. He had been silent for years, but never unaware. Like me, he had been watching, waiting, remembering. The next morning, a brief segment aired on regional news, just a few lines. A high-profile family in Charleston facing internal legal dispute over disputed inheritance transfers. No names, but the image behind the anchor was our old family estate. Blurred but recognizable to anyone who mattered. Camille was the first to feel it. Her social media pages went dark. Comments were disabled. Sponsors started backing out of her skincare line collaboration. By midday, a press release was posted by her PR firm, citing unrelated personal matters requiring immediate attention. Lana's face appeared in a separate newsfeed. Her spa's investment partners had withdrawn interest, citing unresolved legal risks tied to the source of startup capital. I knew they had traced the money trail back to the foundation funds reallocated under her authority. Reed tried to reach me. He called once, then again. Left a message short and sharp. No apology, just outrage that I had let this become public, that I had weaponized the family name. I didn't return his call. The bank moved swiftly. Camille's former transactions were frozen. A subpoena was filed, and with that, the mask began to slip. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was exposure, and exposure has its own weight. Not loud, not violent, just undeniable. What surprised me most was the silence from Lana. She had always been the loudest, the most dramatic. But now, nothing. No email, no desperate knock at my door. Just absence. I imagined she was scrambling, rewriting investor decks, spinning a narrative of victimhood. But the investors were no longer interested in stories. They wanted documentation. They wanted proof. They wanted things she couldn't provide. Back in my own home, I stood by the window and looked out over the garden my husband once planted, a place meant for family gatherings, now grown wild with untended beauty. I didn't mourn it. I let it be. That afternoon, I received a letter by courier, not legal, not personal, just a request for a statement from a major publication. Walter had quietly leaked that the foundation launch would coincide with a public event honoring donors who stood against generational erasure. They wanted to feature the first profile on the founder. I declined. Let the work speak. Let the headlines fade. The point was never to be seen. It was to be heard, just once, and remembered. It was nearly dusk when I heard the knock. Not rushed, not urgent, just deliberate. I stood in the hallway, not moving. The knock came again, then a pause, then the soft voice. "It is me, Camille." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't sound angry. She sounded tired, maybe even defeated. But I stayed still. My hand rested on the knob, but I didn't turn it. I had already prepared the note earlier that day, not out of spite, but because I knew this moment would come. I slid the envelope beneath the door. There was a pause. Then I heard the paper lift, the faint rustle as she opened it. And silence. I had written, "I was once your mother-in-law. I once made soup when you were sick. I once sewed a hem for your favorite dress because you were too busy. I once stood behind you at Reed's graduation and smiled even when you forgot to mention my name in your thank you speech. I once waited for you to remember I was family. But now, I am simply Mrs. Margot Landry. A citizen. A widow. A woman who decided to keep what she built. I will not speak with you. I will not undo what has been done, and I will not open this door." The silence lasted longer this time. I heard no reply, no footsteps. Just the long breath of someone who had finally read the truth. Then she left. I watched her walk down the front path from behind the curtain. She didn't look back. Her coat was too light for the weather. Her shoulders hunched, not from the cold, but from something heavier. When the gate clicked shut, I found Dolores sitting on the couch, flipping through a folder. She had been with me the whole afternoon, finishing the last bit of paperwork for the foundation. The state had approved our non-profit charter. We had a name, a seal, and a starting list of women to support. For those they forgot, the phrase wasn't mine. It came from my husband. In a letter he once wrote to a friend. He believed the greatest danger in life wasn't hatred. It was indifference. It was forgetting the ones who made the quiet sacrifices, and now, with this foundation, I could make sure we remembered. Dolores handed me the official documents with a small nod. We both knew what this meant. It wasn't just about legacy, it was about rebuilding something honest in a world that tried to bury it. Later that evening, I made a cup of tea and stepped out to the back porch. The wind had calmed. The garden was quiet. The leaves rustled without urgency. And I felt still. Not proud, not angry, just steady. I hadn't won. I hadn't lost. I had chosen. The morning was quiet. I sat at the kitchen table. The steam from my tea curling up in slow spirals. Light poured through the window, touching everything with a soft gold that made even the worn edges of the counter feel peaceful. I didn't check the mail. I didn't look at my phone. I didn't open the news. I just sat there breathing, holding the cup with both hands, letting the warmth settle into my fingers. Across the room, the television played at a low volume. Dolores had left it on. A local news anchor mentioned something about a new community initiative. Then the name appeared, for those they forgot. The screen showed a modest gathering, a few women, a small conference table, some brochures, nothing glamorous. But it was real. Then came a photo, black and white. My husband, his hands resting on a bench, a quote beneath it. "We remember those they tried to erase." I watched in silence, not out of pride, but out of a sense that something had been returned to where it belonged. I had not sought revenge. I had not claimed a title. I had only followed the path my husband left me, trusting that truth, even when quiet, could still be heard. The tea had gone lukewarm. I didn't mind. I stood and opened the back door. The garden greeted me. It had bloomed gently, in places I hadn't noticed before. Not bold, just enough to say I am still here, and so was I. They thought I would sign because they called me mother. But being a mother is not the same as giving everything away. Sometimes it means knowing when to stop giving. Sometimes it means choosing yourself. And this time, I did. If you have ever felt forgotten, dismissed, or quietly erased from your own family story, I want you to know your worth never depended on their recognition. It was always yours. This is her light, reminding you that your flame was never theirs to extinguish. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear. Sometimes standing your ground doesn't require raising your voice. Sometimes the strongest response to betrayal is not revenge, but truth. If this story touched something inside you, share it. Let it remind someone else that they are not alone, that it is never too late to reclaim your voice, your worth, your place in your own story. And remember, the light inside you has always been yours to control. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.